Hi, welcome everybody. Welcome back to the channel. And today we're having a great interview with an insurance agent from the Instituto Nacional de Seguros. Juan Abarca and his father have an insurance agency here in Costa Rica, and they're experts on everything related to insurance in Costa Rica. So we're fortunate enough to have him in order to be able to ask questions related to many different insurance topics in Costa Rica. That we get a lot of questions about this, and I thought the best way to resolve this is let's get an expert to talk about. So Juan, thank you so much for joining us today on this interview.
Thank you, Roger, for having me here. It's really an honor to be with you, and I really hope that we can share some valuable information on INS's policies with your audience.
Perfect. It's gonna be great. So let's get started with the first question. I thought we'd break this up in like segments. So maybe the first segment that I have here is let's talk a little bit about home insurance. So can you discuss a little bit more about how that works? You know, I want to insure my house. What do you offer? How does it work?
Sure. What we have over here, we call it homeowners insurance, and it's a comprehensive policy that allows coverage for natural stuff that is really important over here. So we can cover fire, floods, landslide, those kind of issues that you could have with your house, but we can also cover the contents on the house for the same things that I just mentioned, and also for theft.
Okay.
And the last thing that you could include is, as you mentioned, liability. So that's basically what we usually cover within a single policy.
Okay. Why don't we break those down a little bit? So let's talk a little bit about. Okay, I live in the Guanacaste area on the coast, and so I want to insure against, you know, earthquake or wind damage or things like that. What kind of policy would I get for that?
We usually recommend the same policy for the whole of Costa Rica because you might have more risk towards ocean-related stuff at the beach, but maybe you're at the mountain nearby a river, and then you can have a landslide or you can have a flood. The same policy covers everything nature-related.
All over the country. So it's like one policy that covers no matter what part of the country you're in.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
And the cost doesn't, like in the States, it would vary because if you're in a flood zone, it's higher. Here in Costa Rica, the costs. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter on the area. It's more related to the insured values that you're having, and if the construction site itself has an increased risk, it may be a little more costly. But that depends on whether, for example, your house is nearby a big risk or something like that.
Okay. So let's take a typical house. I mean, typical house for that area.
Yeah.
That's gonna vary in price. But let's say we have a house that's, I don't know, let's say $350,000, right? And so I want to insure it against earthquake and all of the natural disasters. What's the name of that policy? And more or less, I know you have to inspect the house and everything, but more or less, what would that cost? Like a range?
Sure. It's the same homeowners policy that you would get. This is a policy that you can work with the configuration, because you could include everything nature related, but you could not include other coverages like liability, for example, or theft. So it's the same policy for everybody, but you decide, or we assess with you what you need depending on your own risks, and then we configure the policy for every single person. For a $200,000 home with about $20,000 in contents and $100,000 in liability. That would be more or less $810 yearly.
So even if you double it, so it's 200. So if you doubled it to 400,000. Would that double or no? It'd probably be like
if you stay with the same liability, then it wouldn't double. So, but if we could increase the liability up to 200,000, that's the most that you could get in this policy. We could also get a liability umbrella policy if you wanted to increase it to have $1 million and upwards. But for this policy, the top is 200,000, and since every coverage has its own rate, if you double everything, the cost doubles. But if you doubled on the building and did more on contents, then it's going to change slightly.
So this policy would cover like any structural damage to the physical building.
Yes.
And then the contents section, I would insure whatever, you guys would inspect the house and then do an inventory of the contents, or how does that work?
Yes and no. We
Okay.
do make an inspection, and what we need is a list of anything that costs over $2,000.
Okay.
Because if you don't provide that list, you will, if when anything happened and you filed a claim,
Okay.
you would have to give both INS and the local authorities. So INS would compensate based on that list, given that you don't go
Above,
that you're above the coverage limit. And if you didn't give the $2,000 per piece list, then you would get reimbursed $2,000 exactly for
Okay.
everything. Basically, when it's something nature related, you just give the list, and the same. If you had provided the list with anything over $2,000, you would get reimbursed by the exact cost, and you still have to provide the invoices. Or if you, for example, if you have a list but you didn't have the current costs of your things, you have to provide a pro forma invoice.
Okay.
So that INS might know, or has a way to know how much are you asking
Sure,
for.
sure, that makes sense, yeah, to estimate the value. Okay, okay, so I think contents is clear to me. Now, to insure the contents for theft, that's like a different add-on to the policy? It's
Yes.
separate, right? So
Yes.
That's like a different, okay,
It's actually, building is one coverage,
okay,
and then the contents, there's two different coverages that you have to choose between.
Okay.
One includes theft and the other one doesn't.
okay, perfect, thank you for clarifying that, that's okay, so that's it. So you can opt in or opt out
Yeah,
of having the
yeah.
theft coverage
Yes,
if you don't
yes,
want it.
anytime.
And is it expensive, the theft component, is why people sometimes opt out, or is it?
No, the people usually goes with it, and the most expensive part is building, actually.
The structural of the
Yeah.
building, okay,
Yeah.
okay, that makes sense, okay. So I think that covers the, at least the part about the homeowners. Hey, Juan, there's another area that's always in the mind of a lot of people that are coming from, especially North America and Canada, is liability. So by liability, I mean, I go to your house and park my car, walk up the driveway, and I fall because you had a defective something stair in there. How does Costa Rica handle that, and what kind of insurance covers against that kind of a risk, which we call in the States like homeowners liability?
We have exactly homeowners liability on this policy. That's the one that I mentioned, that the
Okay.
maximum coverage that we could get within the policy is $200,000, and you could increase that with an umbrella separate policy. Honestly, Costa Ricans don't really sue for liability.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's what I wanted to say. Look, Costa Ricans are not sue happy like they are in other countries, so it's very rare for Costa Ricans to sue each other, but
Yeah. Two things that happen. The increased tourism with people coming from abroad, they do sue. So depending on who you have on your home and what country they come from, Costa Rica does accept the sue. So that's one point. And another point that I'm afraid to mention is that some Costa Ricans try to make an easy life. So if they fell at my house, they would never sue me. But if they fell at an American's house, they would definitely sue them.
the gringo effect.
Yeah, yeah. So
They
it's-
must have money, so I'm going to sue them. Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly. So it's something that does happen, sadly. So I just wanted to mention it because it is
Yeah.
something that
No,
you,
no, I think
you
that-
may go through.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, because I think you're absolutely right. I mean, we generally get a lot of calls from people that, like you mentioned, have traveled here, are staying in a hotel, or staying somewhere, and they send us an email. Hey, I hit my head on the pool. What can I do? How can I sue? Or I slipped in a hotel. Can I sue? So I think that's why I'm glad you're here to discuss that, because what kind of policy, if I'm the owner of a house, what kind of policy would you recommend that would protect me against that type of lawsuit?
Well, definitely this homeowners policy, including the liability coverage, would be what you need to protect yourself at your house for this kind of suit. But now that we mention it, and going a little outside of homeowners, There's also for commercial locals,
Okay.
there's also liability in there. So there's a separate policy that you can also get if you want to protect yourself at work.
Okay, okay. So you got a homeowners, and then there's also commercial for commercial businesses.
Exactly.
Okay, very interesting. Now, suing in Costa Rica also is very different from litigation, at least in the United States, because the process here tends to be very, very slow, and also the awards tend to be a lot lower. So how does that work as far as like the insurance company is not going to pay anything until there's a judgment from a court, or does the insurance company negotiate and try and settle like they do in the United States? How does that work more or less?
They will allow you to settle if you're willing to settle. So if both parts, like if you're the owner of the insurance and somebody fell at your house and you just wanted to take responsibility, the insurance will allow you to not go to court and just be responsible with that. But if you or the other part wanted to go to court and have the full fight, then you'd have to wait until a judge declares who's the winner, so that the insurance would reimburse in this case.
Okay.
So yeah, that's basically the way it goes, and we rarely see people going to court actually. Most likely people solve these things before court, because the process can take 7 to 10 years in some cases.
That's what I was going to mention, 7-10 years to litigate personal injury, more or less, in Costa Rica.
Yeah.
So another question is the cost. So like what amount of damages would it, from your experience, right, so that you've seen, what kind of damages do you typically pay? In other words, somebody broke their leg, okay, and they filed a claim. If you settled amicably, more or less, what does that amount look like?
That depends, and it varies wildly on who is the injured person, because if the injured person is someone that wants to go to a private hospital, a good private hospital, then you would get much more, because if you're at a very good private hospital, we're talking about $10,000 to $15,000. So the insurance adapts to the invoices and the pro forma invoices that INS gets.
Sticking with that example of the broken leg, so okay, so that pays the medical, like the doctors and the hospital.
Yeah.
Is there any type of other compensation, like my lost time from work, or how does that work?
Yes,
in Costa Rica?
as long as everything is backed up, it can cover anything. For example, we had it's a kind of separate thing, but it is also liability.
Okay.
We had a case where one of our customers had a gasoline station, and a diesel vehicle got served with gasoline.
Oh, that's my biggest fear, always. I have a diesel, and my biggest fear is always putting gas in. So what happened there?
That was a BMW from that same year. So they had to send it back to the agency, and the person, the owner of the vehicle, he used the car to work. So we also included on the claim the lost time and the rent for a new car and a new luxury car, because his work required for him to be in a luxurious car. Okay. So yes, the insurance can adapt to whatever is well backed up. If you lost time or if you lost phase in some kind of way, you can also charge for that.
Okay, interesting. So that's a great example of a commercial liability policy.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Juan, we were talking a little bit off camera about some examples, because I think people identify when you kind of talk to them about it, actual real life cases. I know that we kind of can identify with real life situations that happen. So you mentioned one case that related to a natural event. You want to talk a little bit to our audience about what happened in that particular case, which is real?
Yeah, for sure. And what happened in this case is that we had really heavy raining, and these clients of us, their gutters did not resist the volume of water that was raining, and they overflooded inside the house, and the walls were affected, the ceiling was affected, the floors were affected, and we could get compensation for everything in this case. But it's very important to mention that their gutters did receive maintenance, because if INS had found that there was a lot of leaves or material on the gutters, then the claim wouldn't have gotten through, because you must give maintenance to your gutters and to your house in general. This insurance does not cover lack of maintenance.
That's a very interesting topic because, folks, if you're going to get insurance, make sure that you do maintenance on your house and make sure you document it. Because when you do a claim, like Juan just mentioned, if you didn't do maintenance, they're going to deny your claim. So here's a good example where they helped out their client and the client got compensated for everything, but they were diligent in doing their maintenance. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And I want to add that the gutters were well built for the house. Like, they didn't have small gutters.
I got you.
It was a well-built house with a well-built gutters, but that was too much rain.
Yeah, we had, like, this year we had a huge amount of rain in Costa Rica this year. So it's one of those events where you just have a deluge of water and the gutters, no matter how well built, they can't handle that water.
Exactly,
So, okay.
exactly.
Well, that's an interesting example. I think people can relate to that happening to them. And as you say, you mentioned living here in the tropics. Any other type of cases that you want to mention to our viewers about
Yes, yes, and this is related with robbery. It is something that happened in the mountains in Central Pacific to a couple of clients of us. They were having dinner. We got a video as part of the case, and they were normally having dinner, and then the lady got scared, and you see the burglars where they're coming with their faces covered in cloths, and luckily nothing happened besides the psychological damage to this couple, but all their property was taken away. And we could get them compensated. They acted really fast, and they let the local authorities know, and everything got back to them. Well, what didn't get back to them was compensated by INS, but it's something that could happen, and this might be a little word of advice, if you will. I know that having a home alone in the mountain is like lovely, but it's also kind of dangerous. So it's important to invest on security if you're gonna live apart from most people.
That's a valid point, and we're here again. We're talking about things that happen in real life, and robberies do happen in real life. So here's an example where it happened. Luckily, the couple had theft insurance. And so at least they were compensated for their loss, and fortunately their physical integrity was not harmed, and so they were okay, other than huge and traumatic experience. But again, that's part of life sometimes. So great example. So there we have some examples of real life situations, and of course when you're dealing with insurance, generally the situations are not pleasant, because otherwise we wouldn't be talking about them, right? Yeah. When insurance steps in to pay, it's because something catastrophic happened. Yeah. Generally, right? Usually, yes. So, okay, Juan, I think we can move on to the second segment of the interview, and let's switch now gears a little bit and talk about automobile insurance in Costa Rica. Another very important topic, obviously, because if we drive, we certainly want to have sufficient insurance to protect our property, ourselves, but also if we damage anybody else. So in Costa Rica, what types of automobile insurances exist in the market?
Well, there's several companies offering insurance. I would say they're pretty much the same. In Costa Rica, the tendency is to have a very comprehensive insurance policy that gives you several options, and you can configure to your own needs. Okay. So INS's insurance policy is precisely that. There's some basic coverages they're mandatory, and that's liability, because if you're gonna have insurance, at least cover other people. Yeah, right. And there's two separate liability coverages. One is for medical expenses due to accidents with other people, and then there's damages to other people's property. Okay. So that's
the separation. Okay.
Exactly. And then you could cover your own integrity and vehicles. So theft, medical expenses because of your needs. Okay. Car crash, anything that happened to your car, even if it were a third party damaging your car because of bad intentions. Okay. Anything could be covered in there.
Okay. How about if we talk a little bit about the limits? Because I understand in Costa Rica, when I pay the annual right to circulate, the marchamo, which is in Costa Rica, you have to pay an annual fee in order for your vehicle to be able to circulate in Costa Rica, and that includes like a minimal type of insurance, right? But it's very minimal.
Yes, but that only covers medical expenses to yourself and other people involved in the accident,
Okay.
and to a limit of 6 million colones, about $12,000.
Yeah, so that's not sufficient.
No, that's not great.
Yeah.
Within the car policy, there's a couple of extra options regarding your own and other people's medical expenses. You could increase that to or add $20,000 on one.
Okay.
And then there's another one, that the one that I just mentioned for $20,000, that costs less than $2 a year. So that's
That's definitely worth
yeah,
it.
that's practically a gift.
Yeah, yes.
And then there's another coverage that depends on the amounts that you wanted, but that could cover your life, and that could cover medical expenses for anybody that was within the car. So that's something that if medical expense on a vehicular accident is very important to you, there's several options that you could take.
Okay.
Then liability speaking, you have big for our Costa Rican prices. You have very big coverages. You have 200 million colones for death or injury of third parties.
Third parties. Okay.
That's about $400,000.
Yeah.
And if there was a group accident involving more than one person, the amount increases to $600,000.
Okay. Is that the max?
Yeah, that's the max, and the same as with home insurance. If you wanted to go over the top, you can get an umbrella liability insurance that would allow you to jump to either $500,000 or more.
More. Okay. Okay. So that's a what they call a voluntary policy here in Costa Rica. So that's a policy you buy separately.
Exactly.
From the mandatory one. And that covers third-party liability. Let's say I hit a vehicle that's worth $40,000 and I destroy it, then that policy would step in, pay the other party's car.
Exactly.
And if that person was injured and suffered $100,000 worth of physical injuries in a hospital, you would step in and you would pay the hospital that injuries. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. So
yes. The process is really easy, but it's really important to mention that if you have a claim, you must call two entities every time. INS, because you must get an inspector. Doesn't matter if it was in your own garage and you hit a wall and you want your insurance to cover it, it can be covered, but you must call the inspector. And if there's other people involved, or if it was on the road, you must call 911 for the traffic police, because they must give you a report or you won't be compensated. So these two are really important, and this is something that happened to one of our customers on real life. She had a crash with actually a motorcycle in Guanacaste where there were no security cameras. They did call the police, but she had a small problem with the language barrier. She understood that they would take care and they would arrange everything off the courts, and the other guy just went away.
Okay.
And she had no police report. She didn't call the insurance guy at the moment, so we couldn't help her with the claim because there was no proof for INS that the accident even happened.
That, folks, that's a very valuable tip. So if you have an accident in Costa Rica, as Juan just mentioned, you must, first of all, gather your evidence, okay? Get the names of witnesses, take pictures, see if there's cameras, security cameras around that you can go talk to those people. You need to document it yourself. Do not sit there and rely on somebody else stepping in and doing it for you, because that's a clear example of what happened here, that it's not going to happen.
Exactly, and be sure that you get your documents from the authorities. The police officer must give you a document saying that you had an accident. Yeah, thank you. And the INS inspector also has to give you a document because you're filing a claim right there. So it's really important that you gather your evidence, but you receive your documentation from the authorities.
The question was, in Costa Rica, I noticed like when you have an accident, people tend to like have an accident and then they just stop and they don't move.
If both parts don't agree on who's liable on the accident, the police officer has to take photos, the insurance company has to take photos, so people just tend to not move their cars at all at any time.
Okay.
But then you can use common sense too, right? The car, I don't know, if you're in the middle of a curve and it's more risk to leave the car there than to move it aside, then just move it aside.
Yeah.
Insurance and police officers do require for you not to move the car unless logic says that you should move it. Yeah, and you have a valid excuse, if you will. But the thing is, if there's any sort of dispute, then leave it there. If there's no dispute or there's increased risk for leaving it there, just move it away.
Okay, Juan, next, let's just talk a little bit about costs of these insurance. So let's say I have a Toyota 4Runner and it's 2019. Let's say it's got a value of around $40,000. What is it going to cost me to have like this third-party liability insurance, with decent coverage?
Approximately, the yearly cost is about $320,
Okay.
more or less. That is just liability.
That's per year.
Per year, yeah.
So $320 a year to insure that 2019 4Runner.
Yeah, just for liability.
Just for liability.
If
right.
you wanted to include roadside assistance, damage to your car,
Okay.
medical expense, etc., $1,500.
Okay, so if I had full coverage, complete full coverage on that Toyota 4Runner, the 2019 4Runner, just full coverage, I have third-party liability, I have collision, I have roadside assistance, I have medical coverage, then it would be like $1,500 per year to cover that Toyota 4Runner.
Yeah.
Okay,
Really.
so I think so people with that, I think you can kind of get a good basis of what good quality coverage is going to cost you in Costa Rica. Okay, Juan, let's go into the third segment, and this is going to be a topic which I always tell people that are moving to Costa Rica is make sure that you deal with your health issues. Check out your health, make sure you're good, and make sure you have some kind of health insurance. So the next question is, if I'm coming from another country and I'm moving to Costa Rica, and I'm looking for private health insurance, right? Because this is private. What is my option with INS, the National Insurance Institute health policy?
Well, I must say that the big thing over here that is that INS only offers health insurance to Costa Rican residents. So you must have you must be a resident before you can opt for this. But there's two big insurances that we could offer. The first that I'd recommend the most is called INS Medical, and this has a $2 million international coverage in any country of the world.
Okay.
The other option is a little more local. It's called Vital 360, but the main difference or the benefit that Vital 360 has is that they do compensate for pre-existences. A pre-existence is anything that you had before the insurance. INS Medical won't cover that. For example, my mother is diabetic and she does not have within her insurance coverage for her medical expenses related with diabetes. But with Vital 360, she could get it. There's two plans. Of course, the two more expensive and more robust plans do give you pre-existences in Costa Rica.
So interesting. So basically two medical policies, one that does not cover pre-existing conditions, and the other one you could pay that extra and then have it cover pre-existing. So with that in mind, and also very, very, very good point that you made to everybody that you have to be a Costa Rican resident, have residence in Costa Rica to qualify for these policies. Yeah. Okay,
yes, exactly.
And as far as the cost of these policies, let's take somebody, I don't know, in their 50s, 50-year-old male, let's say healthy, no pre-existing. What does that policy look like?
Yearly cost would be $1,500, $4,000 a year in that case.
Okay.
For a healthy male in his 50s, more or less.
Okay, and this gives them access to coverage in any of the private hospitals in Costa Rica, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It works. INS has a medical web, if you want to call it like that, and
Okay.
if you go directly with their representatives, you don't have to pay at all. There is no co-insurance, so they cover 100% of your costs.
Okay.
But if you go outside their representatives, they
Okay.
will you would have to pay a 20% co-insurance, so they would reimburse for 80% of your costs.
Interesting that you mentioned that the policy is international. So I'm a resident, I live here in Costa Rica, and I travel to Thailand or I travel to Europe, and something happens in where I'm traveling in Europe. Will that INS policy cover me while I'm traveling in
Yes.
Europe? Okay.
Yes.
Interesting.
There's two separate ways it can cover. If it's not an emergency and you can call a certain number, they will coordinate everything for you and you will have to pay nothing besides the deductible. If it is an emergency, you can go anywhere you want it in any country of the world, and they will compensate you based on the invoices.
So that's with medical coverage. So it's not, I mean, it's not inexpensive. It's, you're talking about $3,500 to $4,000 for a 50-year-old male, but at least it's an option. Now, if you have pre-existing conditions, you're not going to be covered.
No.
So that's very important to point out there, unless you go with that 360 plan. But the 360 plan, I imagine, is even more expensive. So now, if we have that 50-year-old, but let's say he had a pre-existing condition, let's say he had a heart attack 10 years ago. What's going to happen there?
I can't provide you with costs in this case because they have to analyze every case, because pre-existing conditions vary from case to case, so they have to quote for every single person, but they can cover that.
Okay.
So as long as you're willing to pay.
As long as you're willing to pay,
And the main difference is, for example, in this insurance, you don't get $2 million. You get, I think it's $500,000.
Okay.
So that makes the price drop, and it's kind of comparable. You won't pay much more. You won't pay $10,000, but you won't get the same amounts and coverages in everything, because they, of course, try to compensate to make both insurances competitive.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's great information about healthcare, and of course, folks, if you're traveling down to Costa Rica, make sure you sort out your health insurance coverage while you're deciding to come to Costa Rica, because it is a huge determinant factor. As a matter of fact, we have a lot of people that end up having to leave Costa Rica because they didn't sort out their health insurance matters and then had to travel back to wherever their home country was to get medical care. So, very important topic when dealing with Costa Rica. Hey, Juan, one other question we had, because we're handling some applications for some clients for the digital nomad visa, and part of the requirement from the Department of Immigration is they have to show to the Immigration Department that they have a policy that covers $50,000 worth of medical expenses coverage in Costa Rica. And I noticed on the website for the company that you represent, INS, that they do have a nomad insurance. So I don't know if you want to touch a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's basically insurance to cover that requirement, but there's several plans, so you can increase that amount if you want. And it's an option for people that are not residents in Costa Rica, right? Especially for nomads, but that's an option to get a medical coverage.
Yeah, okay, well, that's great information. And folks, if any of you need that digital nomad coverage, of course, I'm going to include Juan's contact information in the description, not only for the digital nomad insurance, but any type of insurance that you need in Costa Rica. Juan and his father, the Abarca Insurance Agency, that have been kind enough to join us in this interview, they've been around for way over 25, 30 years, I believe.
33.
33, there you go. 33 years in the insurance business in Costa Rica. And so if you need any information about insurance coverage in Costa Rica, whether it's for your home, your vehicle, reach out to Juan, and he'll be able to quote you more specific depending on the situation. Okay, Juan, I think we're about to wrap this up. Maybe in wrapping this up, do you have any tips that we can give our audience here about insurance in general in Costa Rica? Anything you want to say to our audience? Go ahead. The floor is all yours.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for that. I would say the most important thing with insurance in Costa Rica or anywhere is don't rush and really assess your risks, your own needs based on your lifestyle and your budget. Read policies or the conditions for every policy. I know that's a little hard in Costa Rica because they're usually in Spanish. My dad and I have translated every document that INS has, so we can provide at least summaries in English. That's something really important.
Perfect.
Read and know what you're getting. And the most important thing is don't hesitate to ask. And you can contact us at any time and ask anything you want, because it's really important that when you're getting insurance, you know what you're getting, and that when you are going to file a claim, that you are going to get compensated and not going to receive a bad surprise that this or that detail won't allow you to get compensation.
Well, Juan, that's great advice, and I think, you know, I've been working with you guys for many years, and I think what I can say is that, you know, they don't just sell you the policy and then walk away. That doesn't happen with them. They're truly there when you need to make a claim, and like Juan mentioned, contact them before you make the claim, because they can kind of guide you as to the right ways to make that claim, to make sure the claim gets paid. So. Again, Juan, very valuable advice for our audience. I think this is going to be a lot of great information. I really appreciate your time with us today, and thank you so much for doing this interview.
Thank you for having me here. It's really been an honor, and let us know if you need any insurance needs. We're here to help you out.
Absolutely. I'm going to leave a link to Juan's email and telephone numbers in the description of this video. And anybody that needs insurance in Costa Rica, you know who to talk to as well. Thank you very much, Juan, again.
You're very welcome. Pura vida.
Bye-bye.